Have the governments around the world backed themselves into a financial corner with no way out? Is inflation inevitable? Is there any way out? Let's dig in. Running a government budget is a very tricky balancing act. Whether you run a surplus or a deficit, each has pros and cons. When a government collects more in taxes than it spends, a surplus, this might sound responsible, but it can have negative effects on the economy if not managed carefully. When this happens, there's less money available for businesses and consumers. This can slow down economic growth and lead to fewer jobs, higher taxes, or reduced services. To maintain a surplus, the government might even raise taxes or cut public services like healthcare, education, or infrastructure, which can only make life harder for citizens and businesses. So surely running a deficit is a good thing then? Well, there are benefits to running a deficit, especially if the spending, education, or infrastructure, for example, helps to increase the growth of the economy. But that growth needs to be used to pay down the debt in order to balance the budget. If the debt gets too big, the cost of paying back the interest on the debt cancels out any benefit from running the deficit in the first place. And in severe cases, the cost of paying back the interest on the debt can get so big that even if the economy is growing, the interest costs may outpace the growth, and the government will not be able to pay back the debt at all. For example, if your debt interest payments were 5% of GDP, and your economy grew by only 3% that year, you now have a 2% shortfall that you need to make up by borrowing even more and going even further into debt, which makes the interest higher and even harder to pay off next time. If the government can't pay back the debt, they'll default, and that could mean a catastrophic global financial reset. So what can governments do in this situation? Well, they have a big red emergency button they can press. They can print more money, which will devalue the currency and therefore the debt, making it cheaper to pay off. Problem solved, right? Well, unfortunately, the inflation that results from printing the money causes so much harm to the economy that it impacts growth, which then affects the government's tax income and forces them to spend more, and therefore their ability to pay the debt. So the government hasn't solved the problem, they've just kicked the can down the road. This is the situation that many governments, including the US, UK, China, Russia, and many others have found themselves in. This is why inflation is necessary, because governments literally have to print money to devalue the currency in order to make their debts cheaper and easier to pay off at the cost of companies and individuals. But no amount of money printing will fix this problem. In fact, the more they print, the faster and faster the problem spirals out of control. So, collapse is inevitable. There's nothing that stops this train? Well, yes, but there is an alternative. What if we had money that no one could print, manipulate, or control? That's exactly why Bitcoin was created.